Hello everybody, Drywall Repairman here. Channel's growing, so thank you for subscribing and watching these videos. This job here is just a simple job. It's 2 patches on a ceiling. A plumber came in, had to switch some plumbing, and so we have to fix these patches. First thing on any job is always put down plastic, tarps, anything to catch your mess. Drywall is a very messy trade. Drywall, mud, and all that, so it's always easier just to put down a tarp. And if you have a walkway, just put down a tarp in your walkway so you're not tracking mess throughout your home. There's always going to be a mess afterwards, so it's easier just to put down plastic. First thing, after I get this masked off, I want to go through on these patches. The plumber cut out the areas, but he didn't do a good square cutout, so I'm just using a T-square. I'm using a T-square to level off these areas. I'm going to cut them out past. This one right here is water damage, so I'm going to cut it past the area where it's water damage that we need to replace. Some of the paint's flaking off, that's no problem, but I just want to cut out the worst water damage part area. The second patch over here, it's not as bad, so I'm just going to level it off on the sides. It's pretty square, but I want to get it perfect square. It's easier to take the time and just get your areas squared off. You would think the plumber, when he was cutting these out, he could have did a simple square cutout, but these patches are never square. T-squares work good. If you don't have a T-square, you can use a level, 2x2, 2x4, anything that you have. I like to use a razor blade. Once I get the area marked with a pencil, I use a razor blade to score the area. Score and snap. Score and snap. That's what we do with sheetrock. You score it with the sheetrock knife 1 or 2 times, and then you snap it. If you don't have a razor blade, you can also use a keyhole saw. Keyhole saws make dust, so I like to do sealing. I like to do this snapping technique, so I'm not getting a bunch of dust and debris from sawing off the sheetrock. Get the areas all cut up, nice and square. Cleaned up with the razor blade. Sometimes just cut back a little bit. If there's rough edges, just use your razor blade. I always use new razor blades every job. Always switch out your razor blades. Use a nice new razor blade. It makes cutting the drywall a lot easier with a fresh blade. Yeah, to the right of this patch, I'm going to cut it out another 6 inches because the water damage went to the right. So no problem. You cut back a little more using the T-square. Just mark it with the pencil. It's going to take off 6 more inches where the obvious place is damaged. These T-squares are nice tools. If you don't have a T-square and you plan on doing a large drywall project or several drywall projects, go ahead and spend the money and buy yourself a nice T-square. Once you buy it, they'll last forever. Same thing here, just taking out the right part, another 6 inches or so, scoring it with my drywall knife. 1, 2, 3 passes, just scoring it and then snapping the sheetrock. This one I'm going to cut it halfway on the stud, so I don't even have to put no backing here. Halfway on the stud, now I have something to screw the new sheetrock to. You want to keep it halfway on the stud so you can also put screws in the old sheetrock side and the new sheetrock side so both sides are tight. Sometimes this demo and prep work before the sheetrock's more work and labor intensive than the actual sheetrocking process. But you want to take your time, get it all cleaned up. If the plumber or the guy before me took his time demoing this, I wouldn't have to do all this. So I spend all this extra time because the trade before me didn't do his job. Let's say you're going to do a drywall project, or you want to at least get it ready for the drywaller or your next trade to come in. By you doing a simple cutout like this and getting the area prepped, you could probably save some money on the project. You know, if the homeowner already had this area ready for me, I would have probably knocked off 40, 50 bucks if all I had to do is go in there and start sheetrocking right away. But I got to sit here and demo it all out. It takes time. Not a lot of time, but extra time. There's nails in here, so I'm just using a pry bar, pulling my nails. Pull your screws out of the old framing. Once you get all the screws and nails taken out of there, you're going to want to add backing. With this backing, I'm using 1x2s. You can use 1x2s, 2x4s, 2x3s, 2x4s, whatever you have, but you're going to have to add backing. If you don't cut from stud to stud, then you're going to have to add backing. I use these 1x2s because they're cheap and easy to use. And if anyone's been to the hardware store, home store now, they know what a 2x4 costs. So we use these 1x2s to save some money for the homeowner on the job costs. I just cut the areas, keep my mess contained. These are just 2-foot sections. I just need a few of these 2-foot sections. I have the original stud here, the original framing. I like to add some screws. Always add a couple screws on the outside edges to tighten up the old sheetrock to the existing framing. And then you could add your 1x2s or your framing that you cut back. Always add backing to patches. The same process is the same as a 1-foot hole versus a 8-foot hole. You gotta cut it out square. You gotta add backing before sheetrock. Prep work before sheetrock. I do so many jobs where people hung the sheetrock themselves, and then I go in there and I have to pull the patches back out because they didn't add backing. Simple process like this. Like I said, if you don't want to hire a drywaller to do everything, maybe you can do at least the prep work. If you think you're confident in doing at least cutting out the sheetrock and pulling the nails out, pulling screws, even adding framing, hey, that's something, you know, anyone can do. A handy person can do that process. Like I said, if the homeowner or the person before me did all these extra steps, getting the area cut out square and putting screws in it and adding framing, it would have saved money on the project. The less time I'm spending working on these ceilings, the more money the customer's going to save. I don't mind cutting it out, but there's simple projects that people can do themselves. You're going to always have to cut out the area square, and you're always going to have to add framing, no matter where you live in this country. Area codes are different, but the drywall process is the same. So go ahead and cut out the areas, add your backing. I'll always like to add backing on the left and right side of patches. In the ideal world, you want backing on all 4 corners. But as long as you have it on both sides and the patch doesn't move, then you're all right. We don't want that patch to jostle around or move, because if it moves, then it's going to crack out. We don't want to do all this work with sheetrocking, tape, coating, and texturing, and then the patch cracks out. So that's why we take our time to add plenty of screws and add extra backing so our patches don't crack out. I've been in this trade for a while, and I've seen a lot of guys try to do it themselves, and they don't take the time with this prep work, with the demoing and the sheetrocking and the extra framing and the extra screws. These are the most important step process of any drywall job, any project. I had plenty of screws. I like to add screws every 2 or 3 inches or so. It's pretty much rule of thumb. Keep them symmetrical layout. Once you get everything framed up, ready to go, now you're ready for sheetrock. Go ahead and take your measurements, your patches. I like to measure both sides of the patch to make sure they're square. I measure one side and it's 16, the other side 17. Well, I'm going to have to take the measurement from the 17. Always check both sides. It's easier to do it that way. We can always cut the patch down. It's easier to have a bigger patch than a smaller patch. If we get a smaller patch, then we're going to have gaps, so it's easier to cut it back with the razor blade if need be. I already have a small piece of sheetrock here, so I just got to cut off 2 inches or so off the side here. I'm using my T-square. T-square is used for everything. I keep this T-square in the back of my truck behind my toolbox. I use it for every job. Same thing here, just scoring the new sheetrock with the razor blade and snapping it. Then I'm just going to cut the back side, the brown paper side of the sheetrock. Now I got a patch. I got this for my small patch. On my larger patch, I got to use a 2 foot by 4 foot section of sheetrock I brought with me. This one I just need 16 inches by 24. And I use the same thing here. I'm just going to do a long horizontal cut on the bottom of it. And then I get my 16 by 24 inch. Same thing here. Snap the back. Cut the back side of the paper. Now you got your 2 patches ready to go. New sheetrock. Have your drill ready, your screws ready. I use a little pouch with nails. A lot of guys carry these big old framing bags and stuff like this. For patchwork, you want to keep it simple. Even a little 12-volt strong drill works great. This drill I'm using is a heavy drill. Sometimes using these big heavy drills overhead after a while gets exhausting. Sometimes there's these nice little 12-volt pocket-sized drills that work great. I wish I had one of those. So next time I get some tools, I'm going to buy me a littler drill so I don't have to use this big heavy-duty. Add plenty of screws on your patches. Same thing here. You want to add plenty of screws. Add screws every 2 to 3 inches. Get the patch hung nice and secure. Once you get your patches secure, then you could turn around and scrape it. Scrape it with a 6-inch knife. You always follow through after you get your patches hung and scrape them with a 6-inch knife. Scraping the areas with the 6-inch knife gets rid of any boogers, any debris. If there's any nail heads, screw heads sticking out, you'll hit it with your 6-inch knife so you know you need to countersunk your screw a little deeper. Always scrape your patches and then you can follow it through with a fiberglass mesh tape. I always use mesh tape on my drywall repairs. These drywall repairs always use mesh tape. I know a lot of guys use paper tape, this kind of tape, this kind of tape. Always use fiberglass mesh tape on your patch repairs. Any drywall repairs, the only time I'd use paper tape is if I'm doing fire taping or I'm taping angles or you're sheetrocking a big project. A big project to me is like something over 5 sheets of drywall or more. If it's under that, I'm going to use fiberglass mesh tape. It's a stronger material. It sticks to the area, so I don't need to put mud in prior. So that's why we use these fiberglass mesh tapes. I've been doing drywall a long time, and I've only had fiberglass crack on me one time, and it wasn't from me. It was from moving framing. But get the areas all fiberglass mesh tape, and then once you get the patch all fiberglass mesh tape, always follow through with your 6-inch knife and press down on the patch areas. This is pretty much the same process, fiberglass mesh tape on a patch, or if you're fiberglassing a whole sheet of drywall. Same process, patchwork is what we're doing here. Drywall repairs is what we're doing here. Same thing, other patch. You just follow through and get that other patch nice and hung, and now it's ready to go. Same as the first patch, follow through with screws, scrape it, fiberglass mesh it, press down with your 6-inch knife on the fiberglass, make sure it's pushed down good, ready to go. Now you're ready for a first coat. Alright, for first coating patches, I like to use hot muds. If you watch plenty of my videos, you know I like to use this hot mud. This is a 5-minute mud. If you haven't done a lot of drywall, I recommend using just a regular joint compound. With regular joint compounds, you have to let them dry overnight, 24 hours. First coat, let it dry, then do a second coat, let it dry, then do a third coat. I use these hot muds because I mix up a pan by pan, I put on the materials, and it sets up strong. The problem is if you work with these hot muds, they set up however you put the mud on. So you want to be more intermediate, more professional level when you do mudding. If you do work with hot muds, this 5-minute mud, you have to work faster than usual, of course, because it's 5 minutes. But they have 5-minute, 20-minute, 40-minute, 90-minute. So maybe if a 20-minute or 40-minute will be easier to work with, gives you more work time. It sets up in 5 minutes, so you want to kind of get the mud on quickly and cleaned up. First coat, always press down your mud inside your gaps where your tape is. Since these are fiberglass, the mud will push through the fiberglass mesh into the gap. Or you could just pre-fill beforehand, then turn around and tape over your areas. But I like to do this press down method. I'm coating these patches out pretty heavy because it's a big heavy patch. So I'm using my 12-inch knife and I'm using an 18-inch pan. This is a bigger pan used for texture. I like to use these bigger pans because I can mix a lot of mud in one time. Once you get the mud on, I'm using the edge of my knife to feather off the edges. This is called feathering. And now I'm taking a texture knife. This is an 18 or 20-inch Santa Fe texture knife, and I'm using this to coat. Go down the middle and then feather off the sides. That's a nice first coat. Once you get the patches off first coat, if you use this hot mud, you got to clean this hot mud off your tools right away. Within 5 minutes, the mud sets up. If you're using a 20-minute, then it'll start to set up 20 minutes, 40 minutes. It would be a 40-minute, 90-minute, and so on and so on. This 5-minute mud, it literally starts setting off within 4 to 6 minutes, so you want to come check on it. This technique I'm doing here is called slicking out. You have to slick out hot muds. If someone says you sand hot muds, they don't know what they're talking about. They're lying to you. You could sand hot muds, but they set up like a cement. So you're going to have a cement goober on your ceiling or wall. So it's easier to catch these muds before they set up and slick them out like I'm doing. I'm using a straight 6-inch knife and a wet sponge, and I'm taking off the extra material. It's kind of like a wet sanding technique. If you ever worked with cements or clays, it's pretty much the same thing. Once you get your patch all slicked out, now you're ready for a second coat. I'm using another second coat with 5-minute mud. Like I said, you can use a joint compound. Maybe you want to do a first coat with a hot mud and a second coat with a joint compound. You can do that too. A lot of guys will mix half and half hot mud, half joint compounds in their muds. But with me, I like to mix straight hot mud. I don't like to mix two products together because if one fails, it might crack out or something. So I do this straight hot mud. The 5-minute muds, I always mix a pan by pan. If you're mixing 5-minute mud, you definitely don't mix a bucket of 5-minute mud unless you have a bunch of guys going to use it all at once. But it's easier just to mix a pan at a time when you're messing with hot muds. You got to work quick. The second coat's going to be thinner than the first coat, so if your mud's still kind of heavy, just go ahead and sprinkle in some more water. And you want to mix it up thoroughly. You don't want no clumps in it, so you want a nice creamy mud so the mud goes on nice and nice. I'm using my 12-inch knife here, and I'm just going to do a tight skim coat, second coat. I'm going to go past my first coat, and I just basically put mud on the whole patch area. Just coating it out, going past my first coat. You always follow through on your next coat and go past your prior coat. Take your edge and feather off the edges, and I'm just going to pull this pretty tight. We're not trying to put a big old hump on the ceiling. We're pulling this a nice skim tight. going right over our original first coat that was already put on heavier. The second coat's just to make it pretty. Let that set up. Same thing like the first coat. We're going to slick it out as it's setting up. Slick it out with a wet sponge and a clean, straight 6-inch knife. You always have to do this step in between hot mud setups. If you're using joint compounds, you're going to have to let that joint compound set up overnight. And joint compounds you would sand either with a 80 to 150 grit sandpaper in between coats. This hot muds, you have to slick them out like this. This is the proper way of working with hot muds. If someone tells you differently, they don't know what they're talking about. I work with this stuff every day. I go through bags and bags a week, thousands of bags a year. I have to go to a special place and buy truckloads of this stuff. Once it's all coated out, I'm doing a third coat. This third coat is called a Santa Fe skip. Out here we have smooth Santa Fe textures. So same thing here, but here I'm using a joint compound. My third coat, my texture coat, is going to be with a joint compound. Joint compounds have to dry overnight, but with the joint compound, it's nice and creamy. It gives you a better finish than a hot mud. So you always have to texture with joint compounds. I'm going past my original second coat work with this Santa Fe smooth texture and just feathering it off. Nice Santa Fe skim coat with a 12-inch knife. Same thing here with the other patch. I'm just going to feather it out, take it from a different angle. There's nothing to this texture. Maybe you want to try to practice texturing on your own. You'd get a scrap piece of drywall. Practice doing a Santa Fe. The mud consistency, I'd say, is a heavy pancake, creamy batter. And you just put it on with a 12-inch knife or 10-inch knife, and then you just trowel it down. It kind of give you like a smooth texture, but there's some imperfections and voids and skip trowel in it. It's a nice modern texture. Easy texture someone can learn how to do. If you make mistakes with the joint compound, you can at least sand away your mistakes. Once you get your patches all coated out with the third coat, texture coat of joint compound, you would go ahead and clean up your tools and clean up your work area. And you would just let this joint compound texture set up at least overnight, 24 hours. And then you could turn around and sand it with 150 to 220 grit sandpaper, primer, then paint. You always have to primer drywall. If someone says no you don't, I have a paint and primer in one. Paint, type paint, you always have to use primers on a new drywall patches. The patches are porous with muds. They like to absorb moisture, so that's why we use a primer sealer. It seals up the mud, seals up the pores in the texture joint compounds, so when you go to paint, the paint goes over the patch. It doesn't try to soak into the center of the patch where it's the most of the mud work is. But just let those dry. These are simple jobs we did here. Drywall repairs on ceilings. I have several videos